Welcome to Vanguard, a heretical podcast on culture, society, and politics. Here are your hosts, Colin Liddell, Andy Nowicki, and Richard Spencer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Vanguard. This is Richard Spencer. We are recording on Saturday, December 15th at around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Joining me today is Andy Nowicki, our usual co-host. And yes, hello, Andy. And
hello.
Our other friend and co-host, Colin Liddell, is missing in action at the moment. So we decided that we're just going to begin, and we'll patch Colin in once he arrives. So I think that will be he'll arrive shortly. Today we're going to talk about two, again, very divergent but interesting topics. We're recording this around a day after the terrible shooting in a Connecticut school, and we would like to say a few words about that. It seems like the time demands that we talk about that. It's, of course, being used for political gain and all these kinds of things. And then we're going to also talk about the new film, The Hobbit, as well as the whole Lord of the Rings filmic trilogy by Peter Jackson, and also Tolkien's masterful books, and the whole world that was created, and how that relates to our day and age, how it relates to modern Hollywood, how it relates to things like environmentalism and some other interesting topics. So I think this will be a very fun discussion, and like all of our discussions of films, if you haven't seen the movie, you'll probably want to wait to listen to this podcast at least, because we spoil just about everything. But if you have seen the movie, I'm sure you'll really get into the conversation. And also, between our two topics, I'm also going to do a fundraising pitch, kind of advertisement. As you know, tis the season for fundraising pitches, and it's certainly not our favorite thing to do, but it's also a very necessary thing to do. So we'll talk just a little bit about why we do this show and what we hope to gain from it, what we hope you can gain from it, and what it takes to put something like this on. So anyway, it will be a fun show. First off, how are you? How are things down in Georgia? Is the weather cooling down?
It's pretty cool. It's been like in the 50s or so today, and yeah, just sort of relaxing here in the SAV, Savannah, Georgia.
Right. It's becoming quite cold out here in the Northwest. It's dumping snow, so I've already had a few powder days of skiing, so that pleases me greatly. But
I've seen some of your wife's photographs too.
Oh yeah,
some very, very spectacular ones of like icy trees and and other things.
Sculptures covered with snow
winter
and things like. Yes, she's doing some winter like from the Winter's Tale or something. But anyway, let's. I hesitate to even start this conversation because it's hard to imagine anything more unpleasant. But let's just talk about this mass murder in Connecticut. I guess you could. There are a lot of different ways you can start in on this. This reminds me of when we were doing these podcasts earlier this summer, and at one point I asked, is America losing it? Because we shouldn't overestimate spectacular events. It's kind of like the person who they see a plane crash and they're like, oh, I'm never flying again. Even though it's much safer to fly than to drive or even walk down the street, probably. Right. So we need to stay rational about these things, but I don't know. Does that having something to play? I mean, it seems like that's almost unlikely with this person. The suspect, the alleged killer, is named Adam Lanza, and he's actually only 20 years old. There's actually the only photo that's out of him is from 2005, and it's when he was a boy. And knowing what we know now, there's certainly a creepy element. But before we talk about things like gun control or maybe even insanity and things like that, what were your impressions, Andy, of the whole situation? Like, are we losing it as a culture, or is this more of a sign of a, just the reality of mental illness?
Well, yeah, it reminds me of a conversation we had after the Dark Knight Rises massacre on opening night. It was in some ways a similar event. Obviously, this one I find even more horrifying, and just I'm when I read the news, I don't freak out easily. But this is something where, as soon as I heard about it, I just when I heard about what the particulars of it involved, a man entering an elementary school and shooting a bunch of little kids, I just really didn't want to know more.
Yeah.
I was very squeamish and sensitive about it. Of course, having kids myself, puts a different spin on it. But yeah, it's and I guess we're still I am interested in the shooter and his motive. That is something that always intrigues me in events like this, which have been happening way too often. What was it? Earlier in the summer, there was the Batman shooting, and then before that, this has almost been forgotten now, but the shooting in the Sikh temple in Milwaukee, right? That was not too long before the Batman shooting, it seems. I don't know.
Or a little bit afterward, I believe.
Maybe it was after.
Yeah.
But now this shooting in context, just a few days after a mall shooting in Oregon, which wasn't nearly as bloody. I think there were two deaths, but still, disturbing for all the same kinds of reasons. It is a good question. What's making things like this happen? I had a conversation with somebody online about this who said, 50 years ago, people owned guns probably as many people own guns in America as they do today.
Yeah.
But they weren't. You didn't hear about events like this. So, is it? I guess you're inherent in your question is this part of some kind of social breakdown? Have we reached the boiling point, or are these just a bunch of isolated cases of people who are just off their rockers and have decided to just go out with a bang for their own crazy reasons?
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, it's a question. I mean, just to take one perspective on it. I mean, I remember reading some of Ilana Mercer's her blogs on the subject, and Ilana is, of course, she's a staunch libertarian, and she's actually originally South African, and I think she lives up in she lives in the Northwest now, I believe. But anyway, she writes her WorldNet Daily, maybe the only WorldNet Daily columnist I might quote, at least approvingly quote. But anyway, she's an interesting person. She was actually friends with a thinker called Thomas Saz, who's this Hungarian. And he is someone who, obviously I respect him. He's a very interesting writer, and he has some very important points, but I really fundamentally disagree with him. He's someone who really wants us to rethink the reality of mental illness from essentially a kind of right-wing libertarian point of view. Maybe I shouldn't say right-wing, but it's not from there's almost something you would imagine a leftist, these people are political prisoners or something, like some fantasy like that. But he really wants to, he thinks that mental illness is just a way to manage society, whether it's through things like insane asylums or through medication. And I think he's clearly, without question, he's on to something major.
So it's a racket, basically.
Yeah, right? I think it is a racket. And also, just the amount of medication that goes on, particularly with Ritalin, but other things with younger kids. It's totally ridiculous. And it really is a kind of the anti-depression, industry. One could look. I don't think it's some big conspiracy. They're these mad scientists in dark rooms saying like, "Oh, let's dumb them down so that we can better control them." Yeah, I don't believe that is happening, but it almost effectively is like that. It does almost seem like a means of population control, just to keep everyone, gooped up on Prozac and have the kids all drugged out. And these companies make a ton of money. It's a kind of cheap and easy fix. It's like, oh, look, Johnny is not doing well in school. Oh, get him this drugs, Oh, that'll fix it, So, I mean, I think...
It's usually boys who get medicated.
Oh, yeah, without question. Well, this is another subject. I don't think most boys should be in school. I don't mean that from like a snobby point of view. I think boys should be running around. They don't need to be sitting in schools all day. I think the whole education industry is kind of out of whack with reality. But anyway, I guess that's another podcast. But anyway, I think Thomas Zaz and Mercer, they're certainly onto something, and I think this is a very important issue that we should talk about, over medication and population control through medication. But I don't know. It seems like they go too far, and they really want to deny the reality of mental illness. And, things like schizophrenia, and schizophrenia might not be at play with Adam Lanza. But we don't. I've seen Asperger's in there thrown around. We don't know exactly, but let's just like all these people using it as a jumping off point. Let's use it as a jumping off point. Schizophrenia is a very predictable disease. It hits people at a certain age, and the symptoms are quite predictable, quite easily identified. So just the idea that I don't know. I just feel like it's almost like modern. Liberals, they don't want to face up to these realities that we're not rational beings, and that there's kind of dark aspects to people's, not only people, maybe to all of our souls. And I think a correlate to all this is I think very politically incorrect suggestion, and something that definitely goes against the current zeitgeist. And that is that we have this notion that insane asylums are these terrible places. All these evil sadists would run them, and no one, people would get thrown in there, because someone wanted to steal their money, or it's kind of like Hollywood version. But is that true? And should we rethink insane asylums in the sense that taking people out of society? Helping them, putting them under care, essentially. But it's not something that we like to do. The idea of taking away someone's freedom is, that's antithetical to everything we believe. But it just seems like we should at least be open to the discussion of bringing back these institutions, because it seems like when you don't have insane asylums, what you do have is a lot of schizophrenics and other insane people out in the streets. They make up the homeless population, and then you also have some people like, I don't know. I think Loeffner, the case from early 2011, that was, I think, just a open and shut case of he clearly is schizophrenic. Easily identifiable symptoms. He's the right age. All you have to do is look at some of those videos and know that he's a crazy person, so to speak, and wouldn't have been better if we had put him with doctors and caregivers. And so I don't know. I think in some ways everyone's always like, oh, we should have a debate about this, and I think maybe
a national conversation
about insane asylums. Yeah, well, I think we should have a national conversation about insane asylums.
My eyes just roll whenever I hear that phrase. Let's have a national conversation.
As a nation, we've never really talked about race yet. We just haven't. No one's brought it up, It's the gorilla in the room. No one's mentioned race. And they usually don't mention it. They'll just at one point we need to have a conversation, as if we're not. I don't know. It's just.
And when they say we should have a conversation, what they mean is we need you. We're going to need to have a conversation where we talk you into buying our point of view on issue X.
Without question. Yeah, I mean,
So,
like, a national conversation about race is not like, like, let's hear from Jared Taylor on this, no,
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Right.
it's about, doing some new affirmative action thing or something. And
Yeah.
a conversation about guns is obviously just more gun control.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But sorry to jump in here. I feel like, it's like a lot of things. I feel that both sides aren't exactly correct because, and this is why I think we should talk about things that are a little, seemingly outrageous, like bringing back insane asylums. Because I remember seeing a gun control opponent. His name is escaping me at the moment. I believe I've met this man. He's actually in charge of the Gun Owners of America, which is kind of the more harder core version of the NRA. And he was saying that he said some fairly, provocative statement like gun control advocates have blood on their hands because, a gun could have saved all these lives in the school. And, again, I believe me, I don't support gun control in the slightest, but this is an elementary school. I mean, there's no stopping, this is children. What are you going to arm the I mean, it's just, I think it's a little silly to even talk like that. Like, some things you can't prevent. Like, there's evil in the world. There's darkness in this world. And,
Right.
I don't know. I find some of these people, saying things like that, it's just a little distasteful.
Well, it is, but it's what I found distasteful. I guess I shouldn't have found it surprising, but just hours after this event, this massacre in this elementary school in Connecticut, there's all these people saying, "Oh, this is the time for gun control," and just right, turning on a dime. Not even because I guess you strike when the iron is hot, right?
Yeah.
But it was so appalling to me. I actually got drawn into it on Facebook. I got baited into, being provocative the other way, which I now kind of regret. Although, I just it just struck me because my first thought when I heard about the massacre wasn't, oh no, this is going to be this is going to be a rallying cry for gun control. My first thought was, of course, this is so unbearably awful that I don't even want to hear anything else about it. That this kind of death toll and happening at a school and et cetera, et cetera. And then I get on Facebook or whatever on the internet and it's just all about gun control this and gun control that. And I was really annoyed at first and like I said, got baited into, being provocative and obnoxious and everything. But then a few hours later, I was thinking about it, and it occurred to me that maybe for some people, talking about gun control is a way of dealing with, dealing with an unfathomable and as you say, something that's unpredictable, can't be controlled. Things like this are going to happen. Evil people do terrible things. They always have. They always will. And when your number's up, your number's up. And people don't want to have that kind of fatalism staring them in the face. I don't either. Certainly, I'm no exception. But I mean, people who are maybe of a spiritual or religious bent, would take to their knees and pray about it.
Yeah.
But maybe most liberals, I dare say, are more on the secular side. Maybe this whole gun control advocacy thing, this furious push for gun control, whether it's just something so silly as writing some Facebook posts or writing an article in a newspaper or whatever. That's like a kind of prayer for the non-religious, as a way of dealing with this event that suggests unfathomable evil. And so when I think about it that way, it's easier to be compassionate towards these people, and not just to be, not just to see it as the way it initially struck me as just really obnoxious and inappropriate.
I mean, I think what you're getting at in some ways connects what we're talking about with this murder with a movie like Lord of the Rings, where in Tolkien's imagination, there really is evil, or at the very least, there are people with the absence of good. And I think in some ways, in the modern imagination, we want to solve problems, And that's a real American way of doing things, but I think it probably affects everyone who believes in liberalism, writ large.
Yeah.
It's like, let's get more guns in everyone's hands, and then there'll be no crime. That's wrong. Or like, let's take away all the guns and there'll be no crime. It seems to be just two sides of the same coin. Obviously, I come down on the the right wing side or whatever. Yeah. But in terms of people should be able to protect themselves and things like that. But again, I think both sides are kind of in some ways living in a dream world where there's every problem can be solved.
And this slinging sound bites, and everything. Something I did. I posted a Facebook up against guns, don't have one. It was sort of a take on the against abortion, don't have one.
Right.
Soundbite. So, like I said, that was when I was in my kind of evil frame of mind, where I was just really annoyed. It's kind of a shame that we get drawn to this vortex of, taking one side or the other. And I'm not even a big gun person. I mean, I support the Second Amendment, I guess. Yeah. But I sort of have the same perspective that you do. But I'm not. It's not a big time issue for me. And yet, there's something just really, in some way, I just got sucked into this binary kind of Manichaean, where you're on one side or you're on the other, and there's this wide gulf between the two of you, and you're shouting slogans at each other.
Well, speaking of
that, at each other.
Yeah, speaking of that, before we leave this topic, I think it's worth also pointing out that the gun rights advocates and the gun control advocates, they really do just talk past one another at every debate. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons is what we've already discussed, but I think another reason is an almost like geographic difference between them, and that is that most of the gun people, I am a gun owner, but I'm not really into guns like a lot of people are, and I don't really hunt that. I actually go out and shoot some trap actually just for fun, just to kind of relieve some stress. But I'm not a big hunter really. It's not really my cup of tea. But the people who really are into guns, like they're hunting all the time, they own tons, so on and so forth. It's a lot of people who live in more rural environments in the South or Midwest or Northwest or so on and so forth. And so when for them, guns means A, protecting against robbers, B, hunting. And those are probably of kind of like equal importance in their minds. And I think for a lot of white liberals, gun control supporters, basically what they want to do is in a way, like one could say, entirely brutal and racist, and that is they want to disarm urban youths, so to speak. Like they don't go hunt. I mean, I know one friend was telling me there's like there's one shooting range in all of Manhattan or something. There's like, and it's probably entirely expensive, and it's hard to own a gun in New York City.
It's probably where the cops all go.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it's very hard. You've got to pay hundreds of dollars just to register. Yeah. But anyway, what I'm saying is a lot of these urban people maybe they have a revolver to protect themselves, but that's just about it. Like they have no gun culture, and essentially gun control for them is, let's get the guns out of the hands of these, crazed blacks who are going to shoot me. And so, and I'm not saying that each side is kind of coming at it from their own perspective, and they're not going to ever like convince the other side because they come from two different lived experiences. It's just not, it's never going to,
probably right.
It's never going to happen. So, so anyway, I think that's why these, this gun control, it's going to be just an endless endless thing. But, I will say this.
Yeah.
They've had all these mass murders, and it looks like Obama is not really going to pursue gun control. It seems like that is almost like, why fight that battle when... That's
not the hill you want to die on.
Yeah, like you can go win all these other battles. Let's not fight this one, I think.
Yeah. Maybe you're right.
Yeah, I almost wonder if he's like that about immigration too, but I'm probably... I have this theory that that's what his take is on immigration, but then the Republicans are going to pursue some amnesty and mass immigration thing. It's going to be this big ironic. You heard it here first, folks.
All right.
Anyway, let's do this. Let's take a break, and let's see if we can patch Colin in, and then we'll move on to The Hobbit. All right, everyone, we're back. Also, I'll just mention real quick before we move on to The Hobbit that, one thing that I've really tried to do with my adult life is build parallel institutions or alternative institutions, so to speak. And, I always felt that I saw things quite differently than many of my peers who called themselves conservative and so on and so forth. And I didn't really want to keep my head down and, not speak my mind or brown nose of these people. I mean, I've just never been that type of person. And I've always kind of decided just to do my own thing and go my own way and kind of create parallel institutions. And, Vanguard and, alt-right and radix and all these other, we have kind of a movement going. There are tons of HBD blogs and all this kind of, this whole movement, we are not the mainstream media. We're not Fox. We're not anything close to that. But in our own small way, we really are a parallel institution to things that are culturally destructive, in our opinions. And, again, we're not the radio. We're not going to change the world with this podcast. But, in the way that we can, we do really offer an alternative to the brainwashing or dumbing down that you find elsewhere. So anyway, that if I were to sum up kind of why I do this kind of stuff, that is why I do it. I've just always decided to. I've always kind of gone my own way in my life, and this is part of that. But
yeah, I always figured that the easiest thing was to tell the truth.
It's the hardest thing. What they say? Tell the truth. It's easier to remember. I think
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to The Hobbit. But actually, before we move on to The Hobbit, I wanted to let Colin jump in and talk just a little bit about this shooting because while And and I were talking, I believe he was busily writing a column on this very subject. And Colin, at the very end of Andy and my conversation, I was talking about how the gun control advocates and gun control pro-gun people really they talk past one another, and they can never be on the same page because they have different presuppositions, they have different motives, so on and so forth. What I meant by that was that people who are pro-gun are, generally speaking, from the South, from the Midwest. They're from rural communities where, for them, being pro-gun means hunting, and maybe also means defending one's property and family and life. And for people who are anti-gun, it essentially, they live in urban environments. It essentially means for them disarming urban youths. And, one could even say that the liberals who want to do this are kind of the ones who are racist because they're, probably when they think of guns, they think of some dreadlocked thug, who's going to come rape them. And, when a pro-gun advocate when you say the word gun, they probably think about hunting or like, well, I'm glad I have a gun, just in case, a robber comes around. So it's just they just have really incommensurable perspectives on this issue. And so they're never going to reach a consensus because they're starting from wildly different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's how the gun issue is playing out. It's something that people can't agree on, And if they could agree on and they took some kind of political action, it wouldn't work anyway. So it's always going to be there. So first of all, they'll never agree on a solution, and even if they did, the solutions wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So what function does it serve? Obviously, it's part of the culture of America now, which is to polarize people culturally and to keep them sort of identifying in different ways, but to be ineffective.
Yeah.
Kind of like what you were saying a couple weeks ago about the Israel-Palestine conflict, Colin.
That's it,
like
yeah. Get people yakking away, and nothing really changes. It keeps them busy.
Yeah, and it divides the nation. It's just a way of putting people in boxes. Every 2 years, they get to go to a voting booth and pull a lever, and then between those 2 years, they scream at each other all the time. That seems to be what it accomplishes. But
so there's this sort of cultural divergence, but at the same time, it kind of underpins this kind of political convergence.
Yeah, right. Divide and rule.
Yeah.
And also, this is the whole thing's driven by America's massive denial. And no points for guessing what's being denied here, but that's the underlying issue, and it's the unaddressable issue. So if you want gun control, you basically need quite small, truly democratic, homogenous societies where everybody feels part of the same community, and then you can have gun control. And so that's the kind of inherent logic of gun control. So in a way, I think people on the alt-right should go along with that. They should actually embrace gun control. And they should say that, gun control is great, because you do have cases where, disturbed teenagers and crazy people do get their hands on guns, and then this is what happens. I mean, you can't be on your guard everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, let's embrace gun control, I say. But then how can you actually have gun control? The way to have gun control is to have reasonably small, homogeneous societies where everybody feels part of the community. How do you get that? Well, obviously that's a much longer road, but that's the road we should be going on.
In a more homogenous society, gun control wouldn't even be necessary.
Yeah.
Because there would be more
yeah,
harmony.
but don't tell the liberals that, okay?
Right. I mean, if Scandinavia didn't, I agree with what you're saying, generally speaking. But yeah, if Scandinavia didn't have gun control, it's not like there would be they'd be shooting each other at the grocery store.
Right.
I'm kind of reminded of this before we move on to The Hobbit, which is a much more brighter topic. There was some book that was published before the First World War. It was called like The Day the World Went Black or something. I'll go look up this book. But it essentially
That's really the title.
Yeah, something like that. It's melodramatic. But essentially, there's some evil doers, and I think some Jews were involved, and they tried to prove to the world that the Jesus, the resurrection, was a hoax, and so all that stuff that you believe in is wrong. And once they offered definitive proof, all of Europe was at each other's throats. Everyone was either having sex on the street or mutilating their neighbor, robbing him. Setting fire to everything, because there's, of course, no moral center anymore. It's everyone turned into beast or worse than beast. That's kind of it's kind of how I feel about the gun control. I think in a homogenous, civilized society, there's no need to even talk about this. It's like, it's just a thing you have in your house. You might go hunting and you keep it together, but there's no, gun. We only have this issue of gun control because no one wants to set foot in Detroit. That we even talk about this issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a non-issue, and the only benefit it has is if you can actually use the issue of gun control to get at other issues and to win people over on other issues.
Yeah.
So you're saying, Colin, use it as a
tool.
way to manipulate liberals into embracing
racialism.
Exactly.
That's right, Andy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good luck. Good luck in your quest, my son.
My Hobbiting quest. Yeah.
That might be more difficult than destroying the Ring of Power. But
no, but I mean, the thing is, though, you can actually do the same thing with a lot of other issues. It's not just gun control.
Yeah.
I mean, things that liberals care about, like environmentalism, public transport, education, you can say, yeah, I agree with you completely there, but there's something that's getting in the way of all this utopian liberal wonderfulness. Just get them to take that on board at some level, and then step well back. You know, that's my attitude.
I agree. If we could make immigration an environmental issue, I think that would be quite positive. I do agree with you there.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the Dutch homosexual politician who was murdered in Holland.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name at the moment.
But
what was his name? He was murdered, I guess, early 2000s.
Yeah. Maybe it was he was even in the year 2000. But it was sort of like taking a right wing stance on liberalism, or like saying, if we want to keep on having feminism and gay marriage and liberalized abortion and all that, then we've got to get these Muslims out.
Yeah.
It's sort of, I mean, it kind of reminds me of that. It's not exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's move on. First off, let me ask you guys what your impression of the film was. The Hobbit, I'm of course referring to. I'll just say I went and saw it actually. I saw it with my wife this afternoon actually. So I haven't even really had time to digest it. But I've also I've really been imbibing the whole Ring saga this whole week. I've watched the other ones, so before I went to bed, I'd watch a little bit this past week. And but I have to admit, with the Hobbit movie that just came out, and don't let my opinion sway you, but I really wanted to like it. I was really gearing up to like it, and I was kept giving it all these chances. But it really left me cold. I'm not sure it's a great movie, and the other thing about it is it seems like they're making 3 of these things, and I just wonder whether Warner Brothers just wants to sell 3 movie tickets to the same film as opposed to 1. And to be honest, despite the fact that it was interesting and it was charming, and I actually really liked the actors. I like Ian McKellen a lot, and I'm forgetting the name of the actor who's playing the Hobbit, but he was in these BBC Sherlock things. I really like him, so I want to like this movie. Just felt like it dragged. I think they should have done the whole Hobbit in one film. They've now decided to drag out the Hobbit over 9 hours, and that was just my impression. Dragging.
The book of the Hobbit is shorter than the 3 volumes of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Each of those 3 books in the trilogy are longer than the Hobbit is. And yet
it's actually it's the opposite dynamic, because usually when they adapt a book for the screen, they leave a lot out. But in this case, they're forced to put a lot in, because the book's actually shorter than the movie.
Yeah,
it's crazy. I mean, I don't know. That was just my impression. It was almost like after the first hour, I was just like, oh God. This is awful.
Yeah, it seemed like there were some sequences where they were kind of padding things out.
Well, these fights that would just go on endlessly, like them running through the mines. So they went to go visit these goblins. Like, I think they were running through those mines for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I was like, get out of there.
It was kind of numbing instead of exciting.
Yeah.
It's okay, they're still getting knocked around.
Yeah.
They're punching goblins left and right.
Did you guys see the 3D version?
No, I did not. That kind of makes me sick.
I did see the 3D version. In 3D, it actually works quite well, because that's the whole nub about 3D, isn't it? Because we have this rather dead-end culture where everything's kind of been done, and we're forced to rehash everything now.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Okay, 3D, that's the final frontier.
And
so
you make people
3D,
pay more for that.
you're like, keeps you interested simply because it's 3D. I was thinking if this was 2D, I wouldn't quite be so into it, but I quite enjoyed it because of the 3D thing.
Oh, okay.
The gimmick of it.
The gimmick worked for me, yeah. It just made me much more aware that there was a kind of vacuousness to it all.
Yeah.
This is amazing, it's 3D, but, why are they using 3D? Oh, yeah, they've run out of ideas, and they've also run out of ideas because they're just like padding this 3-hour movie with loads and loads of action, and it's all very repetitive, and it's very kind of computer game-ish with, the dwarfs chopping away at all these goblins and orcs and whatever, you know what I mean? So it does become a bit numbing in that sense, but visually I thought it was quite spectacular, and it was quite well paced as well.
Well, let me bring up a subject. I was actually planning on talking about this later, but I think it fits in with what you're saying. I think Hollywood is kind of exhausted to the point. I think this rebooting, though it can sometimes be interesting, I think it's a sign of itself of just their exhaustion. Now they're going to like reboot Batman for the second time. It's like, oh, let's reboot this. They're going to reboot Starsky and Hutch.
They're rebooting Superman, aren't they? I think
they're rebooting Superman again. Yeah, I mean they rebooted him 7 years ago. And they're rebooting and like they're going to reboot Chips, the police show, like the Chips trilogy in 3D. 2018, They've
got Jack and the Beanstalk coming up as well.
Yeah. They really
rebooted version of Jack and the Beanstalk.
Yeah. And so anyway, I think the latest Christopher Nolan's Batman was good. I think the latest James Bond movies we're seeing stuff like that. But I think it's all is an expression of their just total absence of new creativities. But let me mention this. Do you think CGI is evil? And I've always had this impression. I've never, I like the Ring saga that came out 10 years ago. The Peter Jackson's first, the pre-Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and I do like it, and I like a lot of things about it. I think we can talk about those, but I don't really always like the CGI. These big wolves that people are riding, or these orgs that are I don't think I've ever seen CGI where I'm like, thank God for CGI. This has expanded my imagination. When you saw like that stupid James Cameron Avatar, it's like, oh wow, my mind is blown. No, that was not my impression. I thought that was a stupid movie. I've never seen CGI improve things. It seems to just it itself seems to be a kind of lack of imagination from Hollywood and the audience.
Think of how the original trilogy of Star Wars is received.
Oh, that's
as
the
compared
best
to
example.
The second, the prequel trilogy. The more
Those
recent
prequels are, I mean, they are so bad. It pains me. I mean, right, Star Wars, and also I think we were talking about this before air. If you look at Star Wars, that was done with models, and they were sometimes exploding models. And also, 10 years before Star Wars, you had 2001 by Stanley Kubrick, which is done with modeling. Those were stunning films, and Star Wars might not be visually stunning, but it's very interesting. It's very cool. I mean, you can watch it now, I guess 40 years later, and you care about the characters, and it is kind of mythic in its own way. But yeah, I just think I've not seen CGI where it improved something. I think the Peter Jackson's original Lord of the Rings is a very interesting thing, and I certainly would recommend it. It's Nordicism, it's Wagnerian in its own ways. It's very cool, but I think it's cool in spite of CGI. I don't know. I guess I'm a kind of Luddite. I just think the CGI is just awful. It should be destroyed. They should use models.
Yeah, well, maybe, but I think it's a tool, and it depends how you use it.
True.
Obviously, CGI can do some things which you can't do with models and people dressed up in monster costumes. So I would sort of reserve judgment on that and judge rather how they use CGI. And obviously, if they use too much or they depend on it too much, then it just becomes a bit like a computer game.
Yeah.
So there is always that thing. And, of course, if something is done the hard way with little models and things like that, then that kind of has more emotional impact in a way, because not so long ago I went to an exhibition over here in Japan, which is dedicated to Ultraman. Don't know if anybody.
I remember Ultraman.
And he's just this guy who turns into this giant superhero when some monster is destroying Tokyo, as often happens around here. And, it's just like, it gave me some insight into how they got some of the effects. And there was this little setup which showed how they got Ultraman flying through the clouds. And there was this tiny model with little lights in his eyes and wisps of cotton wool and a revolving blue background. It's so sort of craftsman-like.
Mm-hmm. Primitive.
The fact that they had to go to all that kind of trouble to get the finished effect gives a certain emotional resonance to things.
What do you guys think about this? Just the whole kind of Nordic element to this, and kind of let me set this up. I think it's really remarkable that Hollywood does this, because though I think probably any culture can enjoy the Lord of the Rings, both the novels as well as the movies. It really resonates with Europeans. I mean, just the elves and the dwarves and the hobbits, the fairies, just the magic, the giants. I mean, it just, there's something that there's a deeply pagan, Nordic pagan quality to this film, to these films. And it's just hard not to see. It just kind of jumps out. And I think even if it's totally...
Richard, I think you're being very subjective there, because there's also a Jewish narrative to this film as well.
Well, that's interesting. We can go into that. Well, why not? Okay, well, let me make my pitch, and then you can make your counter pitch. This will be interesting. So I think it really resonates with people on a deep archetypal level. And I guess this is kind of my question of, if, this is a mainstream Hollywood movie. I actually believe the Weinstein brothers, who, these guys who also produced Django Unchained, produced the first Peter Jackson one. So, it's kind of a question. Are they just kind of like, it's the simulacrum without the substance kind of, it's like they're showing images of these fairies and mythic things just to kind of push people's buttons, but there's nothing behind it all. It's just all, some kind of big Hallmark card, that there's no real mythic quality to it. It's just the kind of outward manifestations of it. And is that what's happening, or is this a kind of subversive film in the sense that it's brings up traditionalism? But Colin, I'm curious to talk about the Jewish element. I did not see that at all watching it, but.
Yeah, well, I think my take is that the movie is going to be very successful, like a lot of previous movies, including the Lord of the Rings, and it's because different audiences can take different things from it.
Yeah.
And so, of course, white people feeling a bit insecure about their identity, who they are, they're going to jump on that. I mean, things like Lord of the Rings, and also I'd throw in Harry Potter here.
Yeah.
They came out around about the time of the millennium.
Yeah.
And there was this kind of reaction against the idea of futurism and modernity, and kind of harken back to the past, which is partly stimulated by the whole idea of the year 2000, which has a very kind of modernistic feel to it.
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of emotional reaction to that. But these movies, they do have to appeal to very large and diverse audiences to make the kind of astronomical amounts of money that they do. And so there is a lot of different things that different groups can take away from it. And one of the things I noticed about this movie was the basic narrative, which centers around the dwarfs trying to win back their homeland.
Yeah.
That just immediately reminded me of the Jews in Israel.
Yeah. I actually thought the exact same thing.
Well, it's kind of funny if you look at it from Wagnerian standpoint. It's almost like the Hobbit is like the triumph of Albrecht or something. It's like the romance of Albrecht. He gets his gold back. Albrecht's the good guy. He's got to defeat Wotan. Yeah. I think there's weirdly an element to that. Do you think that was conscious with Tolkien? I mean, I was reading up on this before I went there. I mean, it's one of these interesting things. He was very anti-Nazi, I mean, I was, kind of, because he's all, these books are accused of racism and so on and so forth. But he was obviously very, very anti-Nazis. Anti-Nazi credentials are beyond reproach. But at the same time, once you get into kind of postmodern America, anytime you're bringing up this, all Euro, all Nordic world of gnomes and elves, you're accused of racism. It's just too white at some level.
Wasn't there some controversy where they were hiring? They said, asking for extras that they had to be white or something like that, and people complained. But it looks like it looks like that they still stayed with it because it's
there's no blacks.
It's an all-white cast.
It's all white. It's all like Nordic.
Actually, it's becoming more white because, from my memory, I think the first Lord of the Rings films, the orcs were a lot blacker, weren't they? And in this movie, they've kind of like made them a bit. They've made them more white. I feel. I mean, I think the main villain in the movie is this so-called white orc, the pale orc.
That's true.
Yeah. And so I always had this mental image of the orcs as these black bestial kind of creatures bent on mayhem and destruction. And now they've thought, wait a minute, we better be careful here. We might get into some trouble in America here, so we better just try to whiten these guys up, make them look like skinheads a bit more. Yeah.
We don't want another Jar Jar Bing on our hands.
And also the goblins. The goblins are very anglicized, I felt, especially the Goblin King. He was like one of these old kind of colonel characters from British movies.
Yeah, he was. He was.
And then
I recognize the actor.
The dwarves were like pure Braveheart. They're very kind of Scottish.
Well, a lot of the dwarves, they would almost speak in Scottish accents sometimes. They looked almost like Vikings and
they drink a lot.
Yeah. I mean, this goes back to my question earlier, and I was talking about this with my wife when we left, and obviously I think this is better than Harry Potter and some of these others. I remember when I was on a transcontinental plane, or transatlantic plane, I watched the Snow White new version that was done with all the little teeny boppers from Twilight or whatever. Yeah. And it was a terrible film. I could barely watch it, but that was also kind of like this, sorry to use all this academic pomo, language, the thing without the substance, the simulacrum without identity. Right? It was just kind of like they would have dwarves, they'd have elves, they'd have little magic thing, but there's nothing behind it. There was no myth behind it. There's no really rhyme or reason. It was kind of like an excuse to use CGI and an excuse just to kind of make it magic or something. But there was nothing. There was no there. And I know, Tolkien is obviously there, but I feel with these films, I did kind of get that impression. You had all these various accents. You had Irish, Scottish accents kind of mixed up. So it wasn't really an ethnicity, these people, or a race. And it was just some vague, British Isles accent. And then you had like the giants fighting like on the mountains. But I was kind of thinking like, is there anything behind that, or was that just kind of like, oh wow, this would be really cool, we'll CGI up this mountain?
Well, they're shamelessly using certain racial stereotypes, and they're the acceptable racial stereotypes that you're allowed to use. So, of course, if they had, for example, the trolls, those big giant creatures that are trying to eat the ponies, and if you actually had portrayed them using a kind of ebonic style of speaking, that would cause all kinds of furore. But basically, they portrayed them as kind of lumpen proletariat Cockney types. That's fine. They're kind of like caricatures of white Londoners. That's fine. No problem with that. And the dwarfs are essentially Celtic, and that's the whole look and the whole image. The hobbits are kind of like little Englanders.
Yeah, little Englishmen.
So you got all, they've kind of given it a lot of character by referring to British stereotypes. The Goblin King, he's this old toffish guy, so it sort of runs throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Have either of you guys seen the Narnia movies at all? the versions of the.
I haven't seen those
stories.
My mother read all of those books to me when I was a kid, so they're quite meaningful to me. But I have not seen them.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen it, yeah, but I didn't like the Snow Queen. It wasn't my idea of the Snow Queen, so that threw me off.
I was just curious because I know that Tolkien and Lewis are often, discussed in tandem.
Well, they were friends actually.
They were, yeah, and hung out together. And Tolkien was, of course, Roman Catholic, and Lewis was Anglican. But of course, in Lewis's stories, the allegory is very clearly stated. Aslan is Christ, and it's obviously a lot of somewhat blatant in some cases Christian allegory. Whereas Tolkien, to my knowledge, was a devout Catholic, but I don't necessarily see the same kind of allegory at play unless I'm missing something. Unless it's something more subtle.
I don't think it's there. I mean, in some ways, the world of Tolkien, I don't find particularly Christian. I think it. I don't think it's allegorical. I think if there's any allegory that he's trying to put forward, I think it's a kind of conservative naturalist allegory of the ultimate evil being the industrialization of the natural world. And that I remember I was watching the other night the Two Towers, and at one point you have these ancient trees, and they realize that Zauerman is cutting them all down, so they join in the battle and they start crushing the orcs. I think it's almost like a kind of fantasy of the natural world fighting back, against industrialization. Industrialization being kind of evil. So I think it's a kind of, it's kind of a conservative, radical traditionalist almost standpoint.
But now the ring itself, as far as what it represents, how the power that it has, and how the seductive power that it possesses, and if you're the owner of the ring, you feel really powerful, and it seems like there might be something kind of Christian there, and just in the sense of pride, shunning pride and the embrace of worldly power.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, you can see that in
the demonic thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can see that in Wagner's. I mean, despite Tolkien's his attempt to be timeless and all this stuff, I mean, I think he was probably inspired by the original Nibelungen saga, but I think he was inspired by Wagner. I think it's hard. There are a lot of parallel scenes, really, that are different. They're changed, but I think even in Wagner, I mean, the ring is something you don't want to touch. It brings doom, and it is about maybe a combination of power and narcissism. And
isn't there also a sense that certain people can have certain things, and other people can't have them, and if they do have them, then that creates problems?
Well, that's why a hobbit needs to hold the ring, because the hobbits are these little puppy dogs,
harmless.
Yeah. They could never rule.
So you're saying, Colin, you're talking about like a natural hierarchy that's asserted?
Yeah. There's certain people who can be kings, or who can have certain powers, or can possess certain things. That seems to be something that runs throughout the Lord of the Rings series. I mean, I think the last movie before this was the Return of the King. Yeah. And there was this steward who was ruling one of the cities. I forget the name. And he was just a steward. He didn't have the right to exert the full kingly power, but then he did, and that caused various problems to arise. And then he was finally replaced, and the rightful king became the king. So there's this kind of idea of a natural hierarchy in the Lord of the Rings, which is also probably connected to attitudes to nature and the cosmos as well, and natural order. So there is a lot of that as well that can be teased out.
And you can see parallels to race too, I guess, because there are different races of beings who there are obvious racial differences, to put it in contemporary.
Yes, some have elven ears. Well, guys, I'm going to actually have to go to a Christmas party. But why don't we do this? Why don't we just bring up the subject again in the next podcast? Because I think there's a lot more to say, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll do that then.
Yeah, let's begin the next podcast talking about the Lord of the Rings. The other thing, I think a ton of people are seeing this movie, and probably a lot of them haven't seen it yet, so I think it'll be fine to talk about it next week.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just put a bookmark in it, and let's return to the conversation.
All right.